Hi, everyone. I'm Zac Greenberg, co-founder of Musicians for Health, your host for Brain Food. Welcome back. It's been a little while for our season two. We are starting off this season with John Barker here. We're going to talk about some AI. He is an expert in some nuances and slightly abstract. I think that, right now it's a big buzzword and it's very exciting for a lot of us more layman's in the world along AI, but John can give us a little more understanding of what is it, where is it going, where is it coming from. But before we get into that, John, maybe you can give us a little bit of your background and where you're coming from and some of your perspective.
Well, at the moment, I develop innovation programs for companies wanting to apply artificial intelligence to innovate their products and business models. And I also coach and advise boards of directors on fiduciary duties in exercising oversight over AI development and in their organizations, and also the C-suite. And my most recent engagement was with a credit reporting agency, consumer reporting agency. I'm still under non-disclosure for that, but that was in the background screening industry, so AI and background screening. And I think it's going to change not only background screening and employment, I think AI will change the world. So I did a heavy focus on AI in healthcare when I got a master's in regulatory compliance at Northwestern with a focus on healthcare, and I examined the role of AI in clinical decision support. So I'm passionate about healthcare and all its aspects. And I have a long history in, well, I'm a lawyer, but I don't practice, but I use my legal knowledge. And my first degree was in philosophy, and that came as a result of an intense interest in ethics and morality and its relationship to law. And I also spent many decades in what was called the publishing industry for lawyers, physicians, nurses, compliance professionals, but I don't even know if the word publishing applies anymore because everything is now a software solution supported by content. AI will accelerate that. I hope that addresses your questions
Yeah,
on my background. So
yeah, thank you. That is super helpful. And yeah, let's dive in. You touched on a couple things in there, and one of them is what is AI exactly? How would you define it? And maybe yeah, a little history of where it comes from and kind of some
sure.
thing. Yeah.
I so anyone you ask will have a slightly different perspective. I encourage everyone to start doing research and reading about AI. Learn for yourself. I actually think AI can go back to the most ancient times of human recorded history. The Greeks, for example, which pursued automation. Automation has, through tools, has been a goal of humans for centuries. And so I actually look at it going back far back in history. But I point to Ada Lovelace, who has been known as the grandmother of computing, who was a mathematician and worked with Charles Babbage. I actually think I kind of trace AI back to her. A lot of people trace AI back to Alan Turing, who worked on algorithms in Bletchley Park in the UK to discover the secrets of the Enigma machine so they could decode messages in the World War II. And also a lot of AI technology was developed then. The phrase artificial intelligence actually was coined around 1955. So the history of that is recorded. It was recorded by some experts in computing, and there was a lot of debate, actually, thinking machines, machine learning. But you can trace the term artificial intelligence back to 1955. There were several individuals, John McCarthy, Marvin Minsky, Nathaniel Rochester, and Claude Shannon, who were going to we're proposing a 2-month study of artificial intelligence. There is debate about who came up with the phrase artificial intelligence, but people think it was John McCarthy. Marvin Minsky, I think, is a little more known. There's some great YouTube videos that discuss this. I think it's probably unfortunate that we're using the word artificial intelligence. So there are many definitions of it. Yuval Harari, the Israeli historian who's authored several books, refers to artificial intelligence as a form of alien intelligence that's generated a lot of debate. Some people refer to cognitive computing, but I think of artificial intelligence, and it's defined in like the European Union Artificial Intelligence Act. It has many other definitions in statutes, regulations, scientific papers. But I view it as a set of algorithms or technologies that enable computers to mimic or perform tasks formed by humans. It's a form of automation. It is next generation computing. Its power lies in its ability to be unpredictable. And of course, that's also where its harm comes from, is the unpredictability, which is very interesting. Productivity comes from unpredictability. The harm comes from unpredictability. And then machine learning, which is a subset of artificial intelligence. But there are many types of artificial intelligence, and we could talk about them, but certainly the one that's getting the most discussion is generative artificial intelligence, Gen AI, generative AI. And, but AI has been in use for several decades. It's just that we now have computing power and memory, computing memory, to enable generative artificial intelligence. And so that's what's getting all the press.
Yeah. Yeah, we talked a little before this meeting about
Yeah.
in my industry, especially in music and
Oh, yes.
kind of arts in general, Hollywood has been blowing up with all of and yeah, generative is a big part. And then also, as you'd mentioned earlier, the ML, all the machine learning stuff, and being able to just kind of yeah, make some educated guesses basically at a very high level and at very high speeds to be able to do. And yeah, one thing that I don't think a lot of the public knows is how active it's been in my field and really all of our
Yeah.
artistic fields for so long. And yes, the generative stuff is what's really making the buzzes now and kind of turning heads, but the ML, which is a little more the nitty gritty, getting in to do the detail work and the cleanup, and it just being more of an active tool for us active professionals instead of being able to just go into ChatGPT and say, write me a script about Johnny meeting Mary, in the 50s, and then it just kind of pumps it out, but being able to do the less flashy stuff of taking dialogue from a set that
Yeah.
was really windy and just have it clean it up or something really
Yeah.
as simple as
Yeah.
that. And yeah, that's some examples in the arts side. And I don't, if you have anything interesting on the medical side of something, because I know that that sort of thing has been such important tech for such a long time in saving lives and bringing in, yeah, kind of the modern era of medicine.
Yes. Well, there are several examples across the entire healthcare value chain, some of which get a lot of publicity. So, Google, and unfortunately, I don't remember the exact name of the project. There are wonderful podcasts that go really deep into the topic, but creating new molecules, getting insights from medical records, create drug discovery, medical device development, and drug discovery is particularly interesting because it's now been possible to either speed up or skip some of the beginning steps in the clinical trial process because AI can predict human reactions to medical drug therapies. And so speeding up drug discovery, very, very exciting. We also know in pathology, the use of AI to detect forms of cancer in images far earlier than a human being could. The ability to detect errors. But in pathology, I think that's where AI what really got started early in healthcare. There's also the revenue cycle, for collecting revenue, Medicare, Medicaid, private insurance. There's going to be a lot of work in natural language processing, documenting medical necessity in medical records authored by physicians, transcribing physicians' voice to text, document medical necessity to get the right billing code for reimbursement purposes. Detection of fraud and health insurance applications, for example, the revenue cycle management, just huge application. Clinical decision support, which is an area I'm very interested in. There are many forms of clinical decision support, but one of the areas of clinical decision support I spent a lot of time studying is evidence-based clinical guidelines. You might know of UpToDate from Wolters Kluwer, Clinical Key from Relics Group or Elsevier. And so they take in practice changing updates from human review of several hundreds of medical journals, randomized clinical trials are the best gold evidence for practice changing updates. And then those clinical guidelines, even if you're an emergency room physician, for example, and you want access to the most recent practice changing updates that came after your medical education, you can now have that in your medical device. And AI will increasingly be used, natural language processing, to identify relevant medical literature, assist human editors, physician editors in making the practice changing updates. And so huge, just every part of the value chain in healthcare is affected. And you can go to any public search engine, Bing or Google, or there are other public search engines, and just type in impact of AI on healthcare and start reading. It's really interesting. There's a negative side, of course, of AI in healthcare, because drug discovery it has been proved that AI can discover chemical compounds and molecules that are not therapeutic, that can be used for warfare and nefarious purposes as well. So it's a very complex story.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think that's a great segue, especially and relevant with right now, with Oppenheimer just coming out and to tie the arts back in, and and to be talking about AI starting, during the Second War and all of that, and how, relevant medical advancements and warfare can be tied in, and how unfortunately good can be used for bad, and fortunately bad can be used for good. But I know that you have a specialty in ethics and ethics around AI, and I think this would be a great time to talk about the 6 properties and the ethics of AI, if you could explore that a little bit.
So I identify 6, but I do want to note that depending on the level of granularity, some people have many more and some people have fewer. So adopt the framework that you deem most important. I like to use the 6 principles of responsible artificial intelligence identified by Microsoft. But even in the names identified by Microsoft, you could break them down into more. But I think number 1, privacy and security. So Microsoft puts that as one principle of responsible artificial intelligence, but you could say privacy is 1 and security is a 2nd. But clearly we have privacy issues related to healthcare. And artificial intelligence, particularly generative artificial intelligence, relies on data. And so if your health records, including your personal identifying information, are training the neural networks and foundation models and the large language models, then your private information can be exposed. That's a security issue. So healthcare use of AI will need to respect privacy and security. Reliability and safety. So I'll use some dramatic examples. So so hopefully they never occur in reality. But let's say that you have a new drug discovered, and you want the drug AI to be reliable and safe in producing that, in discovering that drug. And you could have a nefarious, malevolent actor sabotage or poison the large language model such that the drug would not be reliable and safe. So, is the AI reliable? Is the AI safe? That's one question. And does it lead to safe and reliable drug discovery? Fairness and inclusiveness. So we have a long history of, and it's painful to talk about, but we have a long history of, in the United States, but actually worldwide, in medical and clinical research. It's so painful to talk about, but in the dark days of slavery in the United States, there were medical experiments conducted on slaves, and the speculum used today in healthcare was developed based on research on slaves. And fairness and the whole history of medical experimentation around the world without informed consent. Painful history. It really is an emotional topic for me to discuss. But inclusiveness, in the history of clinical research, medical research was conducted for white males mostly, and we found out that healthcare for women did not always work the same. Healthcare for people of color, the lack of representation or lack of inclusiveness of them in that research led to inadequate medical therapies for those groups. So we have to address the inclusiveness of all humans in AI-enabled clinical research. Transparency, and this I think is going to be the most difficult part, because generative AI is in some sense a black box. Its productivity comes from the unpredictability of the results. And no one can really, you can explain, well, how we can feed data into a large language model and train it, but it also has emergent behavior that's not predictable. No one can explain why some of the results come out of generative AI. And so transparency of the algorithms, how transparent will the algorithms be? And that goes to another principle of responsible AI, is accountability. So if AI in healthcare leads to a bad outcome, an unsafe outcome, an insecure outcome, an unfair outcome, an uninclusive outcome, who is accountable for that? Is it the creator of the data? Is it the processor of the data? Is it the entity or person relying on the data? So those are the basic principles of responsible artificial intelligence. And depending on how you analyze it, you can come up with different statements. So ethics are a huge issue throughout. And one of the things I think is important to study history is there have been different periods of history when behaviors and practices considered ethical at the time are now not considered ethical. And that, so I believe studying the history of innovation, the history of technology and how it has been used, and what was considered ethical and correct in certain contexts, we need knowledge of that in order to use AI ethically and responsibly. Have a self-critical look at our societies.
Yeah. And I think that more and more conversations between people like you and I,
Mhm.
which mainly is to say different fields that have different perspectives on the uses of AI and
Yeah.
its outcome. Because while on the outside, it seems like my side, which maybe doesn't have quite as many implications as the medical side could on AI, but also it has a lot, especially as we're moving into the next election in politics, and we're seeing more
Yeah.
voice synthesis and deep faking and the ability for AI to be able to mispropagate information on a huge level and really affect the tides of the world, and that unfortunately is very directly tied into the AI in the art and entertainment field.
I actually think that that AI's value and danger in art and entertainment is very, very similar to the value and danger in healthcare. I think they're very tied together. We might think of them differently because we think of the consumer of art and entertainment as being very different from the consumer of healthcare. But when you look at it from an AI perspective, it's very similar. So uses of AI in healthcare can transfer into art and entertainment. It might not seem obvious, and vice versa. So discoveries so healthcare relies in AI, it relies on inputs of images, text, video, sound. So everything in art and entertainment, if you're in the healthcare field, you'll be very interested in observing the advances in AI technologies. And there are many AI technologies in art and entertainment. They're going to be transferable to healthcare. So we need to pay great attention. And the intellectual property
Mhm.
issues are huge. And even the right to access, so if there's a healthcare innovation or an innovation in arts and entertainment, who has the right to monetize it? Who has the right to set the price for it? And pricing is also involves excluding some people from having access to the artwork, the entertainment piece, or the medical therapy, and who has the right to license it, who has the right to control it? Is there an obligation to sustain it? Is there an obligation to improve it? So the questions are actually very similar, I
Yeah.
think.
And it gets into a very dark place very quickly,
Can.
talking about, the unfortunate history of America as one example, but ownership of people's likeness and really their being,
Yes.
starts to become a big question. It's been a big question on a seemingly small topic in the all of the Hollywood strikes this year with SAG
Yes.
and the writer strikes and everything. And intellectual property, as far as owning a script or something, has been a big thing. But also just being a background actor and getting paid $100 for the day, and then they now own your likeness, and
Yes.
forever they can use your image and they can use your likeness.
Yes.
And yeah, it's really gets into some scary stuff, which kind of bridges us into a very interesting story I didn't know much about, but you turned me on to. But um, Henrietta Lacks and her importance in kind of around all of these conversations. Could you talk a little bit about that?
Well, I would encourage everyone to look up Henrietta Lacks in at least Wikipedia, but there's a lot of literature about Henrietta Lacks. So the name is spelled Henrietta, Henrietta. The last name is Lacks, Lacks. And her cancer cells were So she lived from 1920 to 1951. She passed away from cervical cancer. And her cancer cells were the source of what's called the HeLa line. And they were the first immortalized human cell line. And they've been one of the most important cell lines in medical research. And many medical therapies have been developed as a result of her cells. And they were biopsied during treatment for cervical cancer at Johns Hopkins Hospital. The long history, and her cells were harvested without her permission, and therapies were created with no compensation to Henrietta or her estate and her descendants and family members. No consent, no information. There was a settlement. I believe the terms of the settlement are confidential. The settlement involved compensation to her estate for use of her cells in the development of various therapies. The story is not finished, but it's actually very similar to using the likeness of an artist, so cells are, of course, part of the biology of someone's body. And do you own your cells? And do you own derivative works based on insights from your cells? And whereas now I do not have a lot of evidence of AI being used in conjunction with Henrietta Lacks's cells, although AI algorithms have been developed to help identify when cell lines are using part of Henrietta's cells. But I'm sure it's being worked on, cell lines being analyzed by algorithms to develop therapies. But it's that intellectual property issue and the ethics issue, informed consent. So if you are a background, an actor, and your likeness is being used without your consent, your voice is being used without your consent, and profits are made, there's clearly an ethical issue: fairness, transparency, privacy, and security, going back to principles of responsible AI. So in terms of technology, just because you can do something doesn't mean you should. And then there's the legal issue. You have a property right in your likeness. So if you walk down the street and you happen to be, your likeness is picked up in a movie or film, do you have the right to be notified legally and be compensated for that, for the use of your image? Or your voice is picked up and says, oh, I love the voice of, the producer says, I love the voice of that stranger walking down the street. We have 10 seconds of that voice. Let's clone that voice and use it. Oh, I love that person's face or that facial expression. Let's use the eyes as part of a composite face we're going to create with AI. Who owns that? So in healthcare, an AI in healthcare will be able to data mine your medical records. If they are anonymized, does that change your property rights in your health records? If your data are aggregated with data from other people, does that change your ownership rights or your consent rights? So very, very complex issues. And this is where Henrietta Lacks is equally relevant. The intellectual property and ethics issues are equally relevant to arts and entertainment, because if I take your image, is it different from cells? That's something very personal to you, completely unique. If I 3D printing of your hair based on DNA analysis of your hair, now police can take DNA and they can predict how someone's face would look from DNA, and for the use in crime, or identifying victims of crime, or identifying perpetrators of crime. We really are in a new world, and the issue of just because we can does not mean we should, and simultaneously, whether you've consented or not to the use of your your voice, your image, etc., or your persona, your personality through your written and spoken words? Do you have a right to be notified and compensated when any of that has been used or processed without your permission? And what bargaining power do you have when you do have permission? And what happens after you are deceased? Is it part of your estate? Does your estate have a surviving right to be compensated? Huge, huge issues. And then we have to ask, what parts of your being have been used to train AI models and you have no idea about it? And perhaps the owners of the models themselves don't know that you have been an input to those models. That's entirely possible too. It goes back to the transparency issue. So I think those responsible AI principles are a nice framework for analyzing the issues.
Yeah. And I think that a really good point that I was hearing you kind of get at is right now, we're in our early stages of AI tech. And so if we give permission for someone to use our likeness on whatever level they can or do now, in 6 months, in 5 years, in a week, we're not exactly sure, where the capabilities will shift to in that amount of time. If right
Yes.
now they could kind of gently put a likeness of you far in the background and it's not really noticeable, that doesn't mean that very shortly you won't be able to be something totally different, and just because you gave permission for your likeness to be used in a way doesn't mean that it's necessarily ethical to continue using that as the technology advances. And it'll be really interesting to see, yeah, how that ownership continues and the conversations around it. Um,
Well, there's some interesting issues in healthcare privacy laws at the federal and state level. It's very complex. The United States does not have a comprehensive privacy law. And that is one of the challenges we have as individuals in enforcing our privacy rights. But one of the issues is like your healthcare record data is private data, obviously. But some of that data can be resold. And when it's resold by different brokers, another user of that data can reconstitute it and find your identity. And there are exceptions that fall through the cracks of the law because we don't have a comprehensive privacy law. I have not done an in-depth analysis of laws and regulations in arts and entertainment, but I have a feeling there's something similar going on. The other area we need to look at, both in healthcare and in arts and entertainment, is the use of synthetic data. So synthetic data is data that's not the original data. It's artificially created data, but it has similar statistical and other properties of the original source data. And the idea is if I use synthetic data, I'm not going to have all these legal and regulatory issues, but you still at least have ethical issues. It's a lot of open issues to address, and I don't know what to say. I see we're going to have less than 1 minute left in our meeting.
so yeah, we're starting to run out of time. But thank you so much, John, for being here. And this has been so informative and this might need to lead to a second part. We'll see how we
Sure
end up
thing. Be
going
very interesting.
with all
Let's
this.
talk.
Yeah, and especially as AI develops. So thank you so much, John Barker, everyone.